My name is Julia. I'm 35 years old, and for 4 years I lived through torment with a narcissist who convinced me that I was worthless. Every day felt like a battle against words that cut deeper than any knife, and slowly, I started believing that maybe he was right. It didn't start with shouting. It started with whispers of criticism that seemed harmless at first. If I laughed too loudly, he'd roll his eyes and say, "You sound ridiculous." If I spoke my opinion, he'd smirk and ask, "Do you even hear yourself?" When I stayed quiet, he'd accuse me of being cold. Nothing I did was ever right. I remember one night after I shared a small story from work, he looked at me and said, "Julia, do you realize how boring you are?" That one sentence replayed in my head for weeks. Then came the gaslighting. He twisted reality until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. When I confronted him about flirting with another woman, he laughed in my face and said, "You're imagining things. You're jealous because you know you're not good enough." Once, after I found secret messages on his phone, he told me I must have dreamed it, that I was paranoid, that my memory couldn't be trusted. I doubted my own eyes, my own sanity. I started asking myself, what if he's right? What if I really am losing it? The abuse escalated until it was impossible to hide. He didn't just criticize me in private anymore. He humiliated me in front of others. At a dinner with friends, he interrupted me mid-sentence and said, "Don't listen to her. She has nothing valuable to say." Everyone laughed awkwardly, and I smiled to cover my shame. On my 35th birthday, he didn't give me a gift. Instead, he leaned close and whispered, "You don't deserve to celebrate. You're nothing. You've achieved nothing." That night I cried quietly in the bathroom while people outside sang for me. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I believed his words more than my own. I stayed because he convinced me no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky he even tolerated me. I stayed because leaving felt like stepping into an abyss of loneliness I wasn't sure I could survive. Shame wrapped around me like chains. Fear told me I had no strength. Hope whispered that maybe, one day, he would see me, value me, love me. Now, when I look back, the most haunting part is how much of myself I lost in those years. He didn't just break my confidence. He stole my voice, my laughter, my sense of worth. He said I was worthless, and for too long I believed him. But deep inside, a small part of me is still fighting, still whispering that maybe he was wrong. I don't want to be broken anymore. I don't think people understand how silence can be used as a weapon. There were days when he wouldn't say a single word to me, even if I tried to speak. I would ask if something was wrong, and he would just stare at me, cold and blank, as if I didn't exist. That silence screamed louder than any insult. It made me desperate to earn back his attention, even if it meant apologizing for things I hadn't done. Sometimes, after 2 or 3 days of ignoring me, he would suddenly act sweet again, as if nothing had happened. And every time I felt grateful for those crumbs of affection. He had a way of making me feel ashamed of needing love. If I reached for his hand, he'd pull away and say, "Stop being so clingy." If I asked for reassurance, he'd reply, "You're too needy. No wonder nobody likes you." I began shrinking into myself, afraid to want anything at all. I stopped asking questions, stopped sharing my feelings, stopped expecting kindness. I thought maybe if I became small enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, he would finally stop tearing me apart. But perfection was never enough for him. The gaslighting became so constant that I lost trust in my own reality. Once, I saw him locking his phone quickly when I walked into the room. My heart sank. I asked who he was talking to. He smirked and said, "Why are you so paranoid? You're inventing stories again." When I pushed, he told me, "You should get help, Julia. You're unstable." And in that moment, I actually wondered if he was right. I felt crazy for even noticing what I saw with my own eyes. He made me believe that the problem wasn't his lies. It was my mind. The worst moments came when he decided to break me in public. One evening at a family gathering, I served dinner. He took one bite, dropped his fork loudly, and said, "This tastes awful. How can you be 35 and still not know how to cook properly?" My relatives shifted uncomfortably, but nobody defended me. I laughed it off while my hands trembled. Later, in the car, I told him he had humiliated me. He leaned in, almost gently, and whispered, "You're lucky I even put up with you." That phrase carved itself into me like a scar. Isolation crept in slowly. Friends stopped calling because I always made excuses. He criticized anyone I tried to see, saying they were a bad influence, or that they secretly laughed at me behind my back. He told me my family didn't understand me, that they only pretended to care, and I believed him. I started cutting ties, thinking I was protecting myself, when, in reality, I was just falling deeper into his control. I stayed because I thought I couldn't survive without him. He had drained me of every ounce of confidence. He made me dependent on his approval, even though he rarely gave it. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of the world outside, afraid of discovering that maybe he was right, that I truly was worthless. But there's something I realized only recently. Deep inside, there was still a voice, small but persistent, that kept asking, "What if he's wrong?" That voice grew louder every time I looked at the woman in the mirror and didn't recognize her. My eyes had lost their light. My smile had disappeared. My spirit was fading. That voice whispered that I deserved more than silence, more than humiliation, more than pain disguised as love. He said I was worthless. He repeated it until it echoed inside me like a truth. But the fact that I am here, speaking these words, confessing this story, proves that maybe I'm not. Maybe my worth never left. I just forgot it existed. And yet, the scars remain. I can still hear his words when I close my eyes. I can still feel the weight of his silence pressing on my chest. I am not free yet, but I want to be. I don't want to live in the prison he built around me anymore. I don't want his voice to be louder than mine. He told me I was nothing, but maybe surviving him means I am something after all. There were nights when I couldn't sleep because of the words he had planted in my head. "You're nothing without me. Nobody else would ever want you. You should be grateful I tolerate you." I repeated them to myself like some twisted prayer until they felt like facts. And the more I believed them, the smaller I became. I started walking on eggshells. Every step, every word, every glance was measured carefully, as if avoiding a landmine. If I spoke too much, he would accuse me of being annoying. If I stayed too quiet, he would say I was cold and detached. No matter what I did, I was wrong. My entire existence felt like one big mistake. The worst part is how he made me feel guilty for his cruelty. If he exploded in anger, somehow it was always my fault. He'd say, "Look what you made me do. If you didn't act so stupid, I wouldn't have to treat you like this." I remember standing in front of him crying, apologizing for provoking him, when all I had done was ask a simple question. He turned every act of aggression into proof of my failure. I tried to fight back a few times. I tried to tell him that I wasn't worthless, that I deserved respect. But he always twisted it back on me. He would laugh and say, "You're so dramatic. You love playing the victim." His laughter cut deeper than insults. It was as if my pain was entertainment for him. Slowly, I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. I looked older, weaker, drained. My skin broke out. My hair started falling, and my eyes were hollow. People at work asked if I was okay, but I always smiled and said I was just tired. Nobody knew the storm I was hiding. Nobody knew that I went home every night to a man who destroyed me piece by piece. And yet, I couldn't leave. The shame was unbearable. How could I tell anyone that the man I loved treated me this way? How could I admit that I stayed, even when I knew it was killing me inside? I told myself I stayed because I loved him. But deep down, I stayed because I was terrified of what would happen if I left. I thought maybe he would change, that maybe if I endured long enough, if I proved myself worthy enough, he would finally love me the way I needed. Sometimes he gave me glimpses of kindness, just enough to keep me hooked. A kiss on the forehead after days of silence, a sudden compliment after weeks of insults. Those small moments felt like water to someone dying of thirst. I clung to them desperately, convincing myself they meant hope. But they were just traps, bait to keep me chained. There was one trip I'll never forget. I had saved for months to plan a small weekend getaway, thinking maybe if we left the routine, things could be different. I imagined us walking by the beach, maybe laughing like couples in movies. But the moment we arrived, he made it a nightmare. He criticized the hotel I chose, the food I ordered, even the clothes I packed. On the second night, when I suggested we go for a walk, he looked at me with disgust and said, "Why would anyone want to be seen with you?" I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, too ashamed to even cry. That trip, meant to heal us, became another weapon he used to crush me. Birthdays and holidays were never safe either. One Christmas, while everyone else was exchanging gifts and laughter, He leaned close and whispered, "Stop smiling so much, you look pathetic." I froze, my cheeks burning with humiliation, but I forced my smile to stay in place so nobody would notice. I learned how to hide my tears behind forced laughter, how to wear a mask so the world wouldn't see my misery. Money became another tool of control. He insisted on handling our finances, saying I was too irresponsible to manage them. He'd give me just enough to buy groceries, but would mock me if I ever asked for more. "Do you think you deserve nice things?" He sneered once when I said I wanted a new coat. I stopped buying anything for myself. Even basic needs felt like luxuries I wasn't entitled to. And then there were the nights out with friends that never happened. He'd find a way to sabotage every plan. If I said I was going to meet a friend, he'd suddenly become sick, or pick a fight so explosive I'd cancel out of guilt. Eventually, I stopped making plans altogether. My world shrank until it was only him, and that was exactly what he wanted. One of the deepest cuts came from a phrase he repeated often: "You should thank me. Without me, you'd be nothing." He said it so many times that I began to believe it. I imagined myself alone, abandoned, forgotten. The image terrified me, so I stayed. But the truth is, I was already alone. Even when he sat right next to me, I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting my own life. There were moments when I almost reached out for help, but fear always shut me down. One night, after he told me I was the biggest disappointment of his life, I locked myself in the bathroom and picked up my phone. I wanted to call my sister, just to hear her voice, to confess what I was living through. My fingers hovered over her number, but then his words echoed in my mind. "They don't care about you. They just pity you. If you tell them, they'll laugh behind your back." I froze. I put the phone down. I wiped my tears and walked out of the bathroom as if nothing had happened. There were times I thought about leaving. I even packed a bag once. I folded my clothes with trembling hands, stuffed them into a small suitcase, and told myself, "This is it. I'm done." But when he came home and saw the bag by the door, he didn't scream. He didn't beg either. He just smirked, walked past me and said, "Go ahead. Nobody will take you. You'll come crawling back." His calmness was more terrifying than his rage. I stood there, frozen, until eventually I unpacked everything and put it back in the closet. He didn't even need to stop me. I stopped myself. The guilt was another cage. He told me I was ungrateful, that he had given me a life I didn't deserve. He said other women would be thankful to have a man like him. And so, every time I thought about leaving, shame consumed me. I thought, what if he's right? What if I'm the problem? What if no one else could ever love me? At night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation in my head, trying to figure out if maybe I had provoked him, if maybe I had done something wrong to deserve his cruelty. I twisted myself into knots, inventing excuses for his behavior. I told myself he was stressed, that he was tired, that deep down he loved me. But the truth whispered through all the lies. He enjoyed breaking me. And the most painful part? Sometimes, I still loved him. Or maybe I loved the version of him that never really existed. The version I kept hoping to see. The man who would look at me with kindness, who would say I was enough. That hope chained me more tightly than fear ever could. The consequences started showing inside my body before I even noticed them in my mind. My chest felt heavy all the time, like I couldn't take a full breath. My hands trembled when I heard his footsteps at the door. I developed stomach pains so sharp I thought something was physically wrong with me. Doctors said it was stress, but how do you explain the kind of stress that comes from being told every day that you don't deserve to exist? I started having panic attacks. At first, I didn't even know what they were. My heart would race out of nowhere. My vision blurred. My throat closed up like I was choking on air. One night, I collapsed on the floor, gasping, convinced I was dying. He stood over me and said, "Stop being dramatic. Nothing is wrong with you. You're pathetic." And in that moment, I believed maybe I was pathetic, because who else would stay in a life that felt like slow suffocation? I lost myself completely. I didn't know what I liked anymore, what made me happy, what I even believed in. Everything about me was filtered through him. What I wore, what I ate, what I said, what I thought. It was like he held a remote control to my life, pressing mute whenever he pleased. I became a shadow, moving through days without purpose, just trying not to upset him. Sometimes, though, there were cracks in the prison, tiny moments where my old self tried to reach me, like when I saw a group of women laughing together at a cafe and felt a pang of longing, or when a colleague praised my work, and for just a second I thought, maybe I'm not useless. But then I'd go home, and his voice would drown out everything else. Don't get excited, Julia. You're nothing special. Nobody sees you the way I do. And the little spark would die again. But deep down, even in the darkest days, I think a part of me was waiting for the moment I'd stop believing him, waiting for the day I'd look at myself and whisper, enough. That part of me was weak, almost silent, but it never disappeared. I think the most frightening part of living with him was how normal it began to feel. Abuse became my daily routine, waking up to criticism, going to bed with silence. I forgot what tenderness felt like, what it meant to be looked at with love instead of contempt. And because I forgot, I started to think maybe this was all I deserved. I remember one morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. I placed it on the table with a little hope that maybe, just maybe, he would smile. He didn't even look at me. He pushed the plate away and said, "I told you I hate my eggs this way. Do you even listen?" I swallowed my shame and quietly threw the food in the trash. The rest of the day, I didn't eat. I didn't feel I deserved to. I lived inside his rules. What I wore was dictated by him. If I put on a dress, he said I was trying too hard. If I wore jeans, he called me lazy. I started wearing the same plain clothes every day, just to avoid a reaction. I stopped wearing makeup because he said it made me look cheap, but when I didn't wear it, he said I looked tired and old. No matter what choice I made, it was wrong. So I stopped choosing altogether. My world shrank until it was only him and his moods. I learned to read his face like a weather forecast, watching for signs of the next storm, the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes narrowed. I could predict the eruption before it happened, and yet I could never prevent it. The storm always came. The nights were the worst. He would lie in bed scrolling on his phone, smiling at messages he never let me see. When I asked who he was talking to, he'd laugh and say, "You're paranoid again. You need help." Sometimes he'd set his phone face down on the nightstand, look at me and say, "You should be grateful I'm still here. Anyone else would have left you already." I would turn away, hiding my tears in the pillow, praying for sleep to numb me. I began to withdraw from everyone else. When friends asked me out, I made excuses. When family called, I kept conversations short. It was easier to isolate than to risk his anger, but the silence that followed was unbearable. It was like I was trapped in a glass box, screaming, and nobody could hear me. The shame ate at me. I thought, if I tell anyone, they'll think I'm weak. They'll wonder why I stayed. Maybe they'll even agree with him, that I'm worthless. So I kept the secret buried inside me, wearing a smile in public while crumbling in private. And yet, there were cracks. Small, almost invisible, but they were there. Like the day I overheard two women talking about toxic relationships in a cafe. One of them said, "When someone tells you you're worthless, it's because they're terrified you'll realize your value." That sentence pierced me like a blade. For the first time, I thought, what if he's the one who's afraid? What if he sees something in me that I can't see anymore? That thought stayed with me. It haunted me, but also gave me a strange kind of hope. Because if he was lying about my worth, maybe he was lying about everything else too. Still, leaving wasn't simple. Every time I felt strong enough, fear dragged me back. Fear of being alone, fear of failing, fear of discovering that maybe he was right after all. He had built his prison carefully, brick by brick, with insults, with silence, with control. And I had lived inside it so long that the idea of freedom felt terrifying. But the whisper inside me was growing louder. It came late at night, when I was alone with my thoughts. It said, "You don't deserve this. You are more than this. You are not worthless." I didn't believe it fully yet, but I wanted to. And maybe wanting was the first step. The first time I admitted to myself that I wanted to leave, I felt both terrified and alive. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No screaming or breaking dishes. It was just me, standing in front of the mirror, staring at a woman I barely recognized. My eyes were swollen from crying, my shoulders bent from carrying too much weight. And for the first time in years, I whispered out loud, "I can't live like this anymore." I didn't pack a bag that day. I didn't run out the door. It was smaller than that. I started imagining a life without him. I pictured myself walking down the street without fear, Eating a meal without shame, sleeping without nightmares. Just the thought of it felt like breathing fresh air after years underground. He noticed something shifting in me. One evening, he looked at me and said, "You think you can leave me? You won't survive a week without me." But this time, something in me didn't crumble. His words still hurt, but they didn't feel like truth anymore. They felt like chains he was desperate to keep locked. The night I finally left wasn't loud. I waited until he was asleep, quietly put a few clothes in a bag, and walked out the door. My hands shook the entire time. My legs felt weak. But with every step, the whisper inside me grew stronger. You are not worthless. You are not his to destroy. Even now, I'm still healing. His words echo in my head some days. The scars he left aren't visible, but they run deep. Sometimes I doubt myself. Sometimes I feel that old shame creeping back in. But I remind myself of one truth. The fact that I walked away means he was wrong about me. He said I was worthless. He said I was nothing. But leaving him proved that I am something. I am still here, and I don't want to be broken anymore.